Hello and welcome. Today we're here on Ngunnawal country. I am Shane Halloran, a proud Ngunnawal man, a descendant of the Ngamich and the Wallabalua clans of the Ngunnawal people. I honour and acknowledge my Ngunnawal ancestors and elders who are the traditional custodians of the region encompassing Canberra, the ACT and surrounds. I extend my respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here this evening. The Ngunnawal people also acknowledge our traditional neighbours, the Gurungara to the northeast, the Walkley to the south, the Wiradjuri to the west, the Yuin to the east, and the Ngarago to the southeast. A welcome to country is an ancient Aboriginal protocol that once welcomed to Ngunnawal country, traditionally your body and spirit are watched over by the Ngunnawal people and our ancestors. We call on our ancestors to provide you a safe journey during your time on country. I acknowledge Gil Savage, Deputy Director General of the National Archives of Australia, Melissa Beard, Paul Barclay, and of course I also acknowledge the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, AC, who is held in great respect and esteem by many Ngunnawal people as the first Prime Minister to speak the Ngunnawal language in Federal Parliament during the 2016 Closing the Gap address. It's also important to acknowledge that we gather in the middle of NAIDOC Week, a week where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, communities and cultures are celebrated across the country. This year's theme, 50 Years of Deadly, marks 5 decades of NAIDOC carrying our voices, our strength, our stories and our pride. I've been trying to convince my community that I turned 50 this year and I too should be recognised for 50 years of deadly. It's not going over that well. We gather here for Constitution Day here at the National Archives of Australia. This is a significant place to hold the gathering. The National Archive carries the records of the nation. It protects documents, decisions, voices and moments that help Australians understand where we've come from, how we govern ourselves and how the country's changed over time. This includes the Constitution. It also includes the moments when Australians have chosen to change it, including the 1967 referendum. Here on Ngunnawal country, I invite you to also think about the archives in another way. Long before the records were kept in buildings, country held memory. Country held the tracks of our old people, the waterways, the mountains, the stone, trees, the seasons and the pathways all carried knowledge. For Ngunnawal people, country has always been a living record. It holds story, it holds responsibility and relationship. It holds memory of people gathering, travelling, speaking, listening and welcoming others properly. That's what I carry today. Continuing ceremonies are part of that ancient record. It's a reminder that we meet here, we're part of something much older and deeper, an unbroken connection to country that goes back countless generations. It reminds us that when we gather here, we do so in a place of deep memory, a place with law, care, language, belonging that reaches back countless generations. So as you reflect after tonight on Constitution, Federation, democracy and the records that shape this nation, I welcome you to Ngunnawal country in the spirit of Yinjumara, the spirit of respect. Respect for this place, respect for the work of the National Archives, and respect for the speakers who will guide tonight's conversation. And respect for the older archive beneath your feet, always. Now, I encourage you to look, listen and celebrate together. I hope we can travel on a pathway of respect for each other and for the land we're on. Janyimaba, thank you.
Very good, yeah.
Thank you, Shane, for so generously welcoming us to country this evening and also for reminding us that country holds memory. It always has held memory and continues to hold memories. It is now my pleasure to invite Jill Savage, the Deputy Director General of the National Archives, to introduce this evening's guests.
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you, Shane, for joining us tonight and for your beautiful and welcoming words. Before I get started, I would really like to thank the Archives team for making tonight possible. I get the honour of turning up after all the work is done. So thank you, everybody, for putting in the hours and also putting in the effort to this evening. It is a pleasure to welcome you this evening to the National Archives of Australia and to our annual Constitution Day event for 2026. Many of you are already familiar with National Archives of Australia, but for some, tonight may be your first encounter with us. So I'll just give you a little bit of an insight into what we do. We collect, we preserve and provide access to government records that document the key events and decisions that have shaped our nation's history. By collecting and making this evidence accessible, we promote transparency and accountability, helping to build trust in the public record. Our collection spans more than 52 million items, from Federation in 1901 through to recent times. These records enable Australians to connect with the stories and people that define our past, shape our future, and help safeguard our democracy. Today, 9 July, marks Constitution Day. This day marks the birth of the Australian Commonwealth. Significantly, National Archives holds the original Constitution and the Royal Commission of Assent, signed by Queen Victoria in 1900, which brought the Constitution into operation. Tonight, as we mark 125 years of the Australian Constitution, we are pleased to be joined by the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull AC to offer contemporary reflections on the Constitution's role in shaping Australia's democracy. Mr Turnbull served as Australia's 29th Prime Minister from 2015 to 2018. Before entering politics, he had a distinguished career in law, business and the media. As Prime Minister, Mr Turnbull led significant national reforms, including the legislation of same-sex marriage, major pumped hydro initiatives such as Snowy Hydro 2.0 and Australia's first national cyber security strategy. Mr Turnbull continues to contribute to public discussion on a range of issues, including geopolitics, renewable energy and cyber security. I'm delighted to be able to extend a warm welcome to Mr Turnbull to be with us tonight. Joining Mr Turnbull for this evening's discussion, we're pleased to welcome on Constitution Day event moderator Mr Paul Barclay, who will guide the discussion and audience Q&A. For more than 20 years, Mr Barclay has produced and presented programs across ABC radio networks. A Walkley award-winning journalist and broadcaster, he's renowned for his thoughtful analysis and engaging discussions. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Mr Malcolm Turnbull AC and Mr Paul Barclay to the stage.
Thanks very much. I am, I should say, a former national broadcaster these days. Perhaps freer to say what I wasn't able to say when I was working for the ABC. But thanks very much, Jill. Thanks, Marissa. Thanks, Shane, for the welcome to country. It's great to be here at the National Archives of Australia, as I have been for very many years consecutively now, and I do enjoy coming back. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. It's great to be here for Constitution Day on this 150th birthday for the Australian Constitution, 125 years since we became a federated nation. Fair to say we haven't quite embarked on the celebration currently underway in the United States for their 250th birthday, and they're asking, just returned recently from DC actually, and they are a country asking themselves some very deep questions about their democracy and where they are at 250 years later. Nonetheless, our national milestone, I think, does give us an excuse to reflect on our Constitution and the role it's played in our democracy and nationhood, and we are very fortunate, as you've heard, to be joined by former Prime Minister, among other things, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull AC, to help us through that. We'll be ranging over various issues pertaining to the Constitution, including some matters that are not specifically included in our founding document, but perhaps should be. And there'll be time for audience questions at the conclusion, so bear that in mind as we work through the conversation. If your pet topic hasn't been brought up, perhaps you can turn it into a question. And I'll say this now and remind you later, we do like questions as distinct from short speeches. So yes, let's get things underway, and let's give our guest tonight, Malcolm Turnbull, a warm welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Kind of hard to know where to start, but first of all, what does the Australian Constitution mean to you personally, Malcolm?
Well, it's a source of great frustration because I've tried to change it without success. Well, it is, you know, it gets described as the birth certificate of a nation. You know, it's a kind of corny description, but it really wasn't, because Australia was not an independent nation in 1901, nor did it purport to be. So, you know, it's actually one of the, I don't know whether the archives does this, but a good quiz question is, when did Australia become independent, an independent nation? And it's actually a question not susceptible to a glib answer or an easy answer. It's a bit like the question, you know, when does day become night? It's always very hard to determine what is the precise second that happens, but for most of the day, 24 hours, you know whether it's day or night. And it's a bit like that with us. So our independence evolved. Anyway, I don't want to... I am a champion at sidetracking people, so you've got to watch me. You need to be strict. Otherwise I'll go off on a tangent.
Just on that sidetrack, though, would the moment have been that moment in the 80s where appeals to the Privy Council?
I think that's too late. I know that's sort of implied in one of the curatorial notes in the exhibition there, but I think that's that. I mean. No, I think it's, yes, I think it's before that. I think it is, it's certainly not the Statute of Westminster adoption in 1942, too early then, but it is, I would think, at some point between, then and perhaps 1986. I mean, because a lot of this is sort of practical reality. I mean, for example, in the Constitution, the Queen is referred to all the time, and that's, of course, Queen Victoria. Now, we read the Constitution today and we see the Queen, and we would, you know, if you go to law class, law student would be told the Queen means the Queen of Australia, the Queen in right of Australia, or, you know, the King in right of Australia. But in 1901, the Queen did not actually mean Victoria personally or anything like that. It meant the imperial government in Whitehall with all of its majesty and power. And so that's why there are still clauses in the Constitution which allow the Queen to overrule an Australian law within 12 months of its enactment. And there is a provision that allows the Governor-General to reserve a law for consideration by the Queen, which meant, the imperial government in London. And so it was, the Constitution was it was the birth certificate for a largely autonomous but nonetheless subordinate dominion of the British Empire. That's what it was. But it has evolved. And of course, the part of its genius, that's probably not the right word, but a characteristic of it is that because most of the important parts of our small c constitution are not in the large c constitution, it has enabled it to evolve. So our small c constitution has changed very effectively by practice, legislation, judicial decisions, politics, whereas the large c constitution's been very, very difficult to change, as we all know.
So the large C constitution being that which
The
is
text,
written in
the
black
text.
and white.
Yes, that's right, your document you've got out there.
And so that which...
Well, it doesn't mention the Prime Minister, it doesn't mention the Cabinet.
Yep.
There's a whole lot of things that are necessarily implied.
And
I know we're going to get onto this.
Yes.
This is why, you wanted to talk about ScoMo's secret ministries.
I think you were rather enthusiastic to talk about it as well.
Well, I think it's an important thing because the Solicitor General, Stephen Donoghue, who's a good lawyer, wrote an opinion which is really one of his weakest and most unpersuasive. It's worth reading. It's a public document because he asserts that that it wasn't a constitutional requirement of the appointment of somebody to administer a Department of State, in other words, to be a minister, to be made public. It's under Section 64. But he then goes on in the second half of the opinion to say what a terrible, disgraceful thing it was and how it offended concepts of responsible government and so forth. But he essentially, the assertion that he makes in the first part of his advice is undermined by the second half. And I've always thought these appointments are not valid, because how can you be, if you say responsible government is inherent in our constitution, and there's no question about that, there's umpteen, decisions and on that score, we know that. How can a minister be responsible to Parliament if nobody knows they're a minister? Like, it's ludicrous. It's like, again, jurisprudence question: can you have a valid secret law? Well, of course you can't.
That's a reasonable point, but the Australian Constitution, as you've said, makes no mention of Prime Minister, of ministers at all.
No, it does. It makes ministers, ministers to appoint departments.
So yes, so is it a flaw in the Constitution that allowed something like the secret ministries to occur?
I think it was a flaw in the Prime Minister and the Governor-General. The Governor-General, I don't know any other Governor-General would have done that. No, inconceivable. I don't, and it's interesting because I know every single person in the public service chain that was responsible for that. I cannot believe it happened. I know if I'd come up with a bright idea like that, I wouldn't have needed to get to PM&C. Sally Cray would have just, hit me with something until I got out of whatever trance I was under, But
all of those people along the line,
they went along with it. I know.
But they were also told to say nothing about it.
I know. It was a massive failure, and it's one of those things that makes you frightened about how the system. A lot of our system of government depends on people acting, honestly and in good faith. The British have a expression for it, which is, naturally a bit sexist, which is it's the good chap theory of government. Everything depends on, being a good chap. I suppose you can have women that are good chaps too, I guess, in that sense. But what happens when you get someone who is not being good? But it's interesting. Anyway, just on that point of legality, and I've never been afraid to disagree with other lawyers, but interestingly on this point, Bill Gummow, who was a Justice of the High Court, has wrote a note in the Australian Law Journal Review around that time, saying exactly the same point I just made then, exactly the same point. And two very good lawyers, Fiona Ruffley and a colleague of hers, Megan, can't remember the name now, but they wrote an article the following year in 2023, which goes into it very, very in great detail. And it's clearly unlawful. Anyway, it's kind of moot now because the Parliament's passed an amendment to the Ministers of State legislation which says that appointments of ministers of state have to be gazetted. So which is something It's a bit like the bonk ban, right? You wouldn't have thought you needed to put in the ministerial code ministers should not sleep with their staff, but you had to. You wouldn't have thought you needed to pass an act of parliament to say the appointment of ministers should be gazetted, but apparently we did.
But is this the problem with having a constitution that is so bound by convention, by the accepted ways that we should do things, rather than having things codified in black and white that prescribe what can't be done?
I mean, look, I'll make 2 points, a couple of points. Okay, when the Constitution was enacted by the British Parliament, by the Imperial Parliament, the Governor General was intended to be the representative of the Imperial Government in Australia. So the British did not have a High Commissioner, an ambassador in Canberra until 1936, because until then, the Governor General had been, the conduit for communications with London, because he was their man on the spot. And so it was a very, very different role. And so you see it evolved, through the, the Statute of Westminster was the big sort of juncture, I suppose, and which Australia was slow to accept, by the way. We adopted it later than the other dominions. So in that sense, that's what I'm saying earlier, our constitution has evolved, but the text has been hard to change.
I mean, I just wonder, at a time when so many members of the public are cynical and distrustful of institutions and of politicians, to see and hear in retrospect that a Prime Minister, took charge of all of these ministries without anybody knowing at the time, and that there didn't appear to be a kind of constitutional handbrake or any kind of handbrake at all that prevented them from doing so.
If you had said to me, I would not have believed it to be possible, right? I mean, I honestly, if you had said to me before it happened, in theory, playing a hypothetical, could that happen? I would have said no. There's, someone in PM&C would have thrown a wobbly about it, or leaked it to somebody who would have thrown a wobbly about it, and there's no way it would have gone through the Governor General's office. What's the point of having the Governor General if he just signs off on that? So I think Virginia Bell did a review of it, and I think that if you look at the terms of reference, she was not asked to look at what the Governor General did. So that was, it wasn't a case of nothing will save the Governor General. It was a case of we'll just leave the Yarralumla out of this for reasons of discretion.
And was that because the convention is that the Governor General acts on the advice of the Prime Minister?
Well, the Governor General does, but having said that, there are, if I can tell you absolutely, if I'd, rolled around to Yarralumla and said to Peter Cosgrove, I want to ask you to appoint me to administer half a dozen departments of state, but nudge, nudge, wink, wink, no one's to know about it, he would have said, hang on, Malcolm, no.
Yeah.
No, I think this should go in the, I mean, if I'd said, I insist, I'm the Prime Minister, you've got to do as I say, I don't know. But, he would have pushed back sufficiently to prevent it happening. Yes, and probably, suggested I consult my, medical practitioner, sort of brackets, have you lost your mind, or I always thought you were a bit nuts, but now...
So it's imperfect, really, this interaction between the big C and small c constitution, really, isn't it? I mean, it's imperfect because we get imperfect outcomes like that. Well,
let me give you an example about the Crown. So this is so we say, the Crown, Queen or King, the King of Australia. So in about 1953, there was an amendment to the Royal Style and Titles legislation to refer to the Queen being Queen of the United Kingdom and so forth, and her other realms and territories, right? And this was quite a change. And Menzies, and this was enacted right around the Commonwealth. This was done, in deference to other Commonwealth countries that were saying, well, we think the Queen should be the Queen of our country, had to be nominated as the Queen of our jurisdiction as well. And Menzies gave a speech in which he said, this is why I've always said I thought Menzies would have voted for the Republic referendum, by the way. Menzies said, the Crown is the symbol that wherever we are in the world, we are one people, i.e. one British people. And he actually said, the Queen does not sit on the throne because of any law of Australia. She sits on the throne because of the law of the United Kingdom. And if you look at the Constitution, the Queen, Constitution Act, the Queen is defined as Her Majesty Queen Victoria and her heirs and successors in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. So if the United Kingdom were to become a republic, with, I don't know, Nigel Farage or Andy Burnham or somebody, Keir Starmer, maybe a job for Keir Starmer as president, that president would be our head of state, you see. So this is again the point that the reality that we've got, where we've got today, Menzies regarded as utter nonsense. But again, it's a different era. But this is the virtue of the evolution.
Let's talk, you've mentioned about how hard it is to change the Constitution, and I remind people in the room that the last time we as citizens decided to change the Constitution was in 1977 on such pressing matters as the filling of casual Senate vacancies, allowing people in the territories to vote in referenda, and judges' retirement ages.
Which was a mistake, I think.
The judges' retirement age?
I think so, yeah. It's too early. Because they made federal judges retire at 70 because there were a couple of old judges that had stuck around too long and, had gone potty and they thought they should have a retirement age. And the federal judiciary wasn't that big in those days, but now it's very big, quite big. And so
70 is quite young, isn't it, actually?
Well, I'm talking like as a bean counter now. I mean, I'm a lawyer, obviously, but and by the way, too old to be a federal judge. But not that it's something I've ever had any ambitions for. But the problem is the judges get a very generous pension. They get 2/3 of what a judge's pay is. Very, very generous. So you get these people going off the bench at 70 who have got, generally at least another 5 or 6 years of productive work in them, because people are healthier and, don't smoke and drink as much as they used to. And so from the Commonwealth's point of view, you're paying them to do nothing, to retire and probably go off and make money elsewhere. You're paying them 2/3 of what you would have paid them to sit on the bench. And then you've got to go and find somebody else to take their place. So that's why in the States, in the states of Australia, the retirement ages have been amended because they weren't in a constitution. See, this is the problem with constitutions. Our constitution, it's so hard to change. It's, as George Winterton famously described it, talked about constitutionally Australia as the frozen continent. And although I've got another good quote from another lawyer, Christian Porter, who's not always a great fan of mine, but Christian once said, complaining about the Australian Federation is like complaining about Switzerland's mountains, which I think is a good point.
The last time I spoke to George Winterton was actually at Old Parliament House during the Republican Convention, actually. Many of us journalists had questions to ask of him when we were mulling over the possibility of a republic. But sticking on this difficulty to amend the Constitution, so our founding fathers, our constitutional drafters in their wisdom decided to have a double majority requirement in the Constitution, I think we all know a majority of people and a majority of states. Consequently, referenda are very, very hard
I
to
don't think that's
change.
what makes it hard.
You don't?
No, and I think what makes it hard is our very beloved practice of compulsory voting, because if you drag everyone to the polls and say you've got to vote or you get fined, you'll get a lot of people that turn up who don't know what the proposition's about, don't understand, not because they're stupid, but because they've had other things, they're not interested. So if you don't know, you are much more likely to vote no. So it makes it, so that's why constitutional changes have got to have overwhelming support, or they've got to be, they've got to have overwhelming support and or no opposition. And I remember Darryl Dawson, who's member of Parliament when I was in Parliament. He used to make this point that it wasn't just overwhelming support, you needed almost no opposition, practically, which I guess we found out in the Republic referendum.
Yeah.
But interestingly, when you had, say, that the postal ballot on gay marriage, about 20% people didn't vote. I mean, the turnout was amazing, 80%, in a voluntary vote, incredible. And it was a very big majority, 62 or 3% yes. But I don't know, like if the other remaining 20% had been forced to vote, they might, I don't know how they would have voted, but you'd probably think there would have been more no's than yeses there, because I thought, I don't know what to say, I don't understand. I mean, it's actually probably not a good example, because that's a pretty simple thing to understand.
But our politics is more hyper-partisan these days.
Yes, it is.
There's less sense of people reaching across the aisle to find points of common sense agreement. So that in turn, I suppose, makes it even more difficult to foresee constitutional change.
Yeah, I think it's a question of no case is easier. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, should this trouble us, or is this, in a sense, people just being constitutionally conservative, and is that necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I mean, it's probably not the end of the world, but there are aspects of our constitution that need, repair or change, we should have an Australian citizen as our head of state. I think that Section 44 could do with a bit of a refresh. I mean, it wasn't. So there's a good example. Section 44 says, among other, the disqualifications.
Yep.
If you owe allegiance to another sovereign, then you're disqualified, right? And that's now, when the Constitution was written, whether you were in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, India, anywhere in the British Empire, you had owed allegiance to the same sovereign, Her Gracious Majesty Queen Victoria, God bless her. And so, of course, that got reinterpreted as meaning being a citizen of any other country. And so you had people who were, unbeknownst to them, dual citizens of the UK, New Zealand, Canada, became disqualified and lost, had to go to by-elections or lost their seats in the Senate. And whereas in 1901, all of, half the Parliament were citizens, if you like, citizens or subjects of the British monarchy.
So the intent of that obviously is to be loyal to only one country.
Well, no, loyal to one monarch. I mean, I haven't got.
Or to
we should have the Constitution here, but it was essentially yes, okay.
But for people who didn't even know that they were citizens.
That was crazy.
Of another country.
That was crazy. We would see that was an interesting case. So you all remember Section 44? I mean, it was a complete nightmare. Rosemary Lang would remember it very well. The senators were bouncing out of the Senate, and of course they couldn't go to a by-election and come back. That was their problem. But look, what the case that we put to the High Court, the government put to the High Court, I think was a better case than the one the High Court concluded. So we said the High Court, if a person is a dual citizen, in other words, a citizen by the laws of another country, but they have done nothing to affirm that foreign citizenship. So they haven't taken out a foreign passport or, done anything to affirm it, then it should not be disqualifying. And we thought that was, and that was a good argument, I thought. But the court wanted to draw the brightest of bright lines, and so they just said, if you're a citizen of another country, which of course is determined by the law of that other country, then you are out. So, Canavan survived because of he had an Italian citizenship issue, and he survived because of essentially a rather arcane examination of Italian citizenship law. So
That was a strange period of time.
God, it was strange for me. It was in 2017. I'd had a back operation, a sort of a mind, like I had a problem, bulging disc, and I'd had some surgery to fix it. And the operation was over. I was, in one of those attractive, hospital gowns with no back on them, lying in a bed, recovering from this. My phone calls, the first call I had wasn't from anyone wishing me a speedy recovery, because we didn't tell it. Well, we kept it all on the down low. Obviously, colleagues knew because there was an acting prime minister in place, etc. But the phone rings and it's Matt Canavan, and he says, oh, hello, Matt, how are you? I'm an Italian. I said, what? What? What are you talking about? I'm an Italian. Oh, okay. Oh, great. I was still a bit worse than the anaesthetic. I thought, I think I'll just go back to sleep. I think maybe I can get the anaesthetist back, knock me out properly. And so then it rolled on.
Yeah. So that's one thing we could possibly change. The other attempt that we made to recognise First Nations people in our Constitution and implement the voice was a substantial failure. What do you think we learnt from that referendum?
Well, it was a mistake to put it to a referendum.
You initially opposed the idea, actually, because then you came around and supported it.
I supported a yes vote because I was not going to line up with all those reactionaries opposing it, right? Yep. You've got to draw the line somewhere. But I did not, when I was Prime Minister, I did not think it was a good idea to do it. I thought it was a mistake.
The third chamber argument was your original point,
the third chamber argument I got criticised for, but let me come back to that. But my point simply was, I'll tell you that, look, this is what happened with the recognition. There was an argument for Indigenous recognition in the Constitution. It's clearly way overdue. But then in about 2016, it got sort of hijacked by Pearson and, I'm sorry, I've got a mental block now. But
Megan Davis?
Yeah, Megan Davis, and others, who wanted to have this voice idea, an Indigenous assembly, which we've had several of, right, in the past, which have been abolished, but the
rejecting symbolic recognition alone.
Yes, and Noel said symbolic recognition would just be putting a plaque in the Constitution, right? So that was his argument.
Yep.
And my concern was that it just had no chance of success, right? And I remember we had a meeting in the Cabinet room with the Referendum Advisory Council, which had Noel and, I can't remember whether Megan was there, but no, I remember Mark Liebler was on it for some reason or other. And Shorten was there with me. And when they raised this, I said, it won't get up. And Noel said, are you saying we can't propose it? I said, no, you can propose it. You can recommend whatever you like. I'm just telling you, I don't think it'll succeed. And Bill said, it doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell. I agree with Malcolm, which was nice because he very rarely said he agreed with me on anything. And then the debate went on. Labor then decided they had to support it. I think it was essentially a political decision. And so it rolled on over the years, and eventually Albo put it up. But interestingly, the next year, Shorten at the Closing the Gap speech, which was the one after I'd sort of, done my first address in Honourable, Shorten said Labor would legislate a voice first and then consider putting it in the Constitution. And I remember listening to him. I thought to myself, I wish I'd thought of that. That's a much better idea. Because then, two things. One, you get the voice. Two, because you don't need to put in the Constitution. Two, then you can test the waters, see if you can get it, if you think you can get it up. If you can, maybe have a go. If it goes down, doesn't matter, it's still there. If it gets up, that's great. And the other problem, and the other virtue then would be, if people said, what does this voice involve? You could say, well, it's got 27 members, meets every second Thursday, it's, in that building round the corner, and, it's done this, this and this. And you're dealing with something concrete. But interestingly, the Indigenous leadership really opposed legislating it first and talked Labor out of that, which I think was a political mistake, because the one thing, uncertainty is the friend of the no case in the referendum. And then, of course, Albo went along with it. Now, there's been a lot of myth-making about, it was beaten by racism and all that stuff. I actually don't buy that, What beat it was the fact that it was so uncertain, it was so open to being represented. If you say it's going to be a voice and you say, I'm not going to tell you what the details will be, it's that's yet to be determined. Well, your opponents will make up whatever they like. So you'd be much better off actually having the thing set up. If you leave the canvas blank, your opponents will fill it in for you, unfortunately, in horrible hues. I mean, David Cameron made the same mistake with the Brexit referendum. First, the big mistake was having the referendum, but they made a conscious decision not to do any economic analysis of the consequences of Brexit. So, which I always thought was immoral, or irresponsible, I guess, a better word, because he was essentially inviting the people of Britain to give uninformed consent. If you think about whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, a financial advisor, we're all meant to be giving informed consent. If we have a referendum in Australia, you send out explanatory material. And so I think that was...
He seems not to foresee the possibility that the Brexit referendum would succeed.
Well, he thought he'd succeed. And you see, this is where the polling was very misleading with the voice. Polling can always mislead you, right? But if you say to people, if you say to people, do you think, gay marriage should be legalised, for example, and there were a lot of polls on that. Well, people know what you're talking about. They say, does that mean my, Fred and Bruce and, Susie and Wendy, do I care if they get married or not? Is that going to be the end of the world? They can understand it. But if you're dealing with something that people do not know about, and in respect of which there has not been a debate, you're essentially polling into a vacuum. I think that's what happened.
Yes,
that's my view anyway.
Some friends and colleagues of mine who work in political messaging said that there was an inherent contradiction in the argument, in that you were saying that people were being encouraged to vote for a small change that would in turn make a big difference.
Yes, I agree.
And in the mind of people, it was like, well, what is it? Is it small or is it big? And of course, the opportunity was missed to get recognition, symbolic recognition of Indigenous Australians into the Constitution.
Yes, I know.
Do you think if it had just been a question around that,
yes, it would have
that
passed.
it would have succeeded?
Yeah, I'm sure it would have. Yeah, I know. It's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking, and that's why I nonetheless supported it. I mean, Lucy and I both felt, I didn't think it was a great idea, but I was not going to line up with, Abbott and others opposing it. But I thought it would have been better to be passed. But sadly, it didn't get up. But I think I hope that at some point a government actually just establishes a voice by legislation, and if somebody says, well, are you going to put it in the Constitution? They say, oh, well, we might, I mean, I don't think ATSIC was abolished, as many of us remember.
Yep.
I don't think that could happen again, particularly if it was an advisory body. I mean, ATSIC had, it was a different type of body. It had administrative powers, it had a budget and so forth. The voice concept, the advisory body, I don't think that'd ever get abolished.
Well, we spoke to Megan Davis on this very stage 2 years ago after the constitutional vote went down, after the referendum was unsuccessful, and her response was very interesting. They'd gone back, they'd done some research about what went wrong, and I think acknowledged actually that the country were not prepared for that question. There was not enough information out there, and so I think they did acknowledge actually that it was a mistake going forward.
Direct democracy is not a good idea, right? I mean, it really isn't. I mean, that's why we invented parliaments. Seriously. I mean, people think the politicians are terrible. I mean, if you could have a referendum tomorrow, bring back the lash or hanging or something, it'd probably get.
So that's a horrific
exactly.
prospect.
Well, yes, I'm saying, there is a reason that we have parliaments.
Yeah. So, speaking of referenda that didn't get up, the Republic,
yes,
which you spearheaded all of those years ago and was thwarted, some might say, principally by John Howard. Looking back at that now and looking at where we are at the moment, you still believe that we should have a Australian head of state? Was it a resident as president? Was one of the slogans. What do you see the future of republicanism being like today?
Well, unfortunately, it's a victim of the voice. I mean, Albanese had the stuffing knocked out of him by the voice defeat. All politicians are confidence players, and he paid me more than most. And he just does not want to go near another referendum. I mean, he's just basically said, note to self, don't go near a referendum, right? So I think that's really disappointing. But look, my view always was, and I've been very consistent about this for decades, is I always felt the next referendum should be after the Queen's death. I think that it should be, and this is the way you win it. I think firstly, you've got to have an advisory vote, similar to what we did with the gay marriage vote, maybe not a postal vote, but you have an advisory vote on how you choose the president. And you thrash that issue out. And there are really only two choices. There's a parliamentary appointment, some sort of supermajority in Parliament, or direct election. And you get all of these amateur constitutional lawyers, they drive me mad, wanting to have their own cunning scheme and, this. I mean, if you it's either one or the other. You have direct election, and, I saw the ARM at one point a few years ago had some direct election hybrid where the states would nominate, and, that's, people say that's, so you're telling us who we can vote for, No, if you're going to have direct election, you say anyone can nominate. You might say, so that the ballot paper isn't like a Senate ballot paper, you might say you've got to have 10,000 or 5,000 people to nominate you or something like that, just to winnow it down. But you either have direct election or you have indirect appointment. But I reckon you take that and you thrash that out first. And I do not think I am not at all convinced that you will necessarily direct election will win, by the way.
Well, it's problematic, isn't it?
Well, it is problematic.
You have two elected
totally.
sources of power.
Yeah, totally. And every focus group we ever did started off with, 2/3 in favour of direct election and ended up the other way around, right?
Yep.
So anyway, so you do that, and then you say, right, okay, the people have decided we're going to have direct election or parliamentary appointment. Then Parliament, drafts the Constitution Amendment Bill, and that goes in a normal referendum. But you see, the reason for this approach is so that you're not fighting two wars at the same time, a war on two fronts, if you like. Now, I think that's your best hope. That's
And yes, and
hopefully, I've had so many friends of mine who are no longer with us who've said, I hope I live long enough to see Australia become a republic. I hope we all live long enough to see that. But,
yes,
you do worry a bit.
sorry to drag you through that trauma of thinking back to that era.
Plenty of things you can give me PTSD on, I can tell you.
When we were originally kind of discussing what to talk about tonight in the Constitution, one issue that came up that was going to have more prominence than it's ended up having, principally because this is not in the Constitution, is this issue of free speech.
Yes.
At the heart of any democracy there is the promise of free speech for its citizens. Our Constitution doesn't mention anything about free speech. You're not a fan of constitutional bills of rights, but we are about the only liberal democracy in the world that doesn't have some kind of mechanism like that. If not a Bill of Rights, and I take all of the arguments as to why they have gone a bit out of favour of late, how do we ensure that basic protections like free speech are protected for citizens?
Electing people that will defend it. I mean, as long as your democracy's works. And I mean, this is a problem the Americans have got because their democracy is quite corrupt now. I mean, it's it's not work. It's failing, and there are people trying to make it even worse. But I think, look, I mean, the High Court has found there to be an implied freedom of political communication, so that gives you some measure of protection.
Very limited.
Yes, it is limited. What's my view on Bills of Rights? I think the problem with having what you could call generally worded guarantees of human rights in a constitution like ours is that you're essentially giving the court legislative power.
Yep.
And political power. They're making political decisions, very political decisions. And then you can see what that's done in the United States. So, when I was a young law student, I thought this was a great idea because they had, liberal Supreme Court of the United States, and, they'd done desegregation and a whole lot of other great reforms. But, now the wheel has turned. It doesn't look so good. The other thing is, if you think of the abortion decision that was reversed, Dobbs was reversed. There is an argument. I mean, that was a terrible thing to do, really. Precedent, what had been on this, was it a 50-year-old precedent or something like that? Incredible thing to do. But if the court had not made that decision at the time it did, the political campaign to get legislatively choice and women's right to choose and so forth, that would have continued and would have had a lot of success, I think. But of course, a lot of people then said, "Okay, the court's made its decision. We don't have to continue campaigning for this."
But the judges were appointed to the Supreme Court in America on the basis that they would oppose Roe versus Wade.
No, it's America is, you've got to. It's hard to defend it as a democracy. I mean, you've got. You think about our system. I mean, we've got the AEC estimates that 97.5% of Australians who are entitled to be on the roll are on the roll. And some of you are under 18, but young gentlemen here, how old are you? 14. Well, in 4 years' time, you will be put on the electoral roll whether you like it or not. But I mean, they do that. Can't wait. He can't. No, but they'll do that, right? And then if you don't, turn up and take a ballot paper, they'll, fine you some huge amount, not very small amount of money. But you look like you're obviously looking forward to that. But in the States, the estimate of the eligible, percentage of eligible voters that are people eligible to vote that are on the roll, it varies. People don't really know, but maybe 2/3. And then, of course, the people that actually vote is a fraction of that. So it is. It varies from state to state and place to place. It's very problematic. They've got their congressional districts, the House of Representatives districts are gerrymandered, so most of them are not actually genuinely contestable at a general election. In other words, either the Republican or the Democrat will win, which means therefore that the important electoral contest is the primary. So the important thing is, if it's a Republican district, to win the Republican primary, so you run off to the right and snuggle up to Mr Trump. And if it's a Democrat primary, because only the party, more zealous party supporters vote in the primary, you run off to the left. So as a consequence, you have a Congress that is far more polarised than the population is. I mean, that's just the beginning of it. But I mean, we're fortunate that we've got, and had for over a century, compulsory voting, compulsory preferential voting, and of course an independent electoral commission.
But perhaps adopting some of that culture of hyper-partisanship in our parliament more than in the past.
I think it is. I think the parliament's got a lot to do with it too. The building, I mean.
Yeah.
I think the building was a mistake, but I think we're stuck with that for like next half, millennium. So how many of you remember the old Parliament House? Yeah.
Yep.
So Old Parliament House was too small. I never served in it, although we had the Constitutional Convention there in '98, so I guess I had a bit of a taste of it. But the Old Parliament House was smaller, and there was, because to get anywhere you had to go through King's Hall, there was a lot of serendipitous encounters. I've always found the problem with our current Parliament House is that it is so vast. I mean, senators hardly ever meet MHRs. You can walk from one end of the building to another in a sitting week and pass hardly anyone, because everyone's, away in their offices. I mean, when I was Howard's parliamentary secretary, I was sort of like the junior minister for water. May gave me that job to draft what turned out, big water reforms, which we actually implemented, I might add. My office was at the far end of one of the House of Representatives, House of Representatives wing. So I was as far away from the Prime Minister's office as you could be. I don't think that was deliberate, but so I would walk often, back and forth to the PMO to see the boss, and I could do that, and I, might pass one or two people in the whole walk, which must have been, I don't know, 500 metres, 700 metres, long. It's a big place, and so I think that's alien. There isn't a bar there. The most only place for convivial activity is that, rather, ordinary coffee shop. Aussies. I mean, like there should be a tea room. There should be a bar. There should be places where people are brought together. That's what parliaments are about. So I think it's really. I don't know. I mean, I imagine many of you. I know some of you.
We have
very
digressed.
Senior roles there, but I mean, you've all had experience there. I don't know whether people agree with me.
Going to take some questions in just a minute, so just put your thinking cap on. I was thinking, Malcolm, that in my lifetime, I can think of probably only 75 when Whitlam was sacked and 99 in the lead up to the Republican referendum, where the Constitution was the centre of debate around dinner tables, around
Section
water coolers,
44,
maybe Section 44 amongst more of your, perhaps. Does the fact that our Constitution is rather an uninspiring document contribute to our apparent lack of interest more generally in civics, in constitutional and political awareness? I mean, we're at a time now where there seems to be more disengagement, more disinterest. distrust. I mean, is part of that because we don't have an inspiring constitution,
Yes.
perhaps?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's a big problem. I think because if you were a Martian and you landed in and in a world of conspiracy theories, who knows? Maybe you are. Anyway, that's right. We've got nothing against Martians. We're all, we are the most successful multicultural society, not just in the world, in the universe.
You'll be quoted on this. The Murdoch press will be quoting you about Martians tomorrow.
The Murdoch press, yes. But anyway, but if you were a Martian and you landed and someone gave you the document, you would say this country is run by the Governor General, who gets some advice, and help from people in the Parliament. And if someone said, no, the country's run by the Prime Minister, hang on, it's not here.
Yeah.
No, there's no mention of that. And so I think that is so this is what I'm saying. It was written, it's a set of rules. See, Britain doesn't have a written constitution in the sense that the Americans do. So basically this constitution was a set of rules to accommodate the federation, division of powers between the states and the federal government and other mechanical things, but the big picture was actually outside it. So it was that's why I say you've got to talk about a small c constitution and a large c constitution. So yeah, it's not. I mean, it's tough work, but I mean, there's some very distinguished former members of the Parliamentary Education Office here who know that you can do the job and instruct young people in the constitution.
So just one more. I mean, we have spoken about the reasons why a Bill of Rights may not be a good idea, handing over power to unelected judges to make essentially political determinations. But this is just my view. I mean, I think most people would have a different view. It's a common argument, and I think we're seeing some very concerning things happening in the US along those lines. So in Australia, to get around the fact that we didn't have bills of rights, we had a period of time in the 1990s where the High Court, under the Mason leadership, Chief Justice, found some implied rights in our constitution, Mabo and Wick being perhaps the two big rulings. That era of implied rights has kind of passed. That era of judicial activism, as some may call it, has passed. Can you envisage a time when a High Court might be prepared once again to be more adventurous?
I don't think Mabo and Wick were really I mean, they were. It was obviously. I mean, they were essentially making findings of fact, as to whether.
Finding native title.
Yeah, but it wasn't in the Constitution. I mean, the proposition was that native title had existed.
Yep. Right,
had existed before Europeans arrived, and then the proposition was that in many areas of Australia, that native title had been extinguished.
Well, maybe then the free political communication is a better example of an implied right. We don't have freedom of speech in the Constitution, but we'll find this limited right.
Well, let me as you know, restrictions, some state restrictions on, I can't remember the name of the case now, was it McCloy, is that right? The one about political donations, limiting political donations.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So I've always felt that political donation should be limited to citizens, to vote, to people who can vote, and there should be an annual cap. I'm not $1 million, I don't know whether it's $5,000 or $10,000, whatever it is, but and you should do that. And my view in the light of those decisions, which were based on the implied right of, political communication and political activity, was that you would need to change the Constitution to do that. I mean, I talked with both my attorneys general about that, and we were tossing, is this something we really want to invest a lot of political capital in? But I think you probably would need to do that. So that's a good example of where an implied right is not I don't think many people would welcome that.
Yeah.
And of course that has had horrible consequences in the United States, because of the court has basically disallowed pretty much any, material restrictions on political fundraising.
Okay, let's take some questions from the floor, and we have a very quick hand that's gone up on my left. So maybe we'll bounce from one side of the room to the other. Our first questioner.
Hello. So in 1977, one of the changes to the Constitution was allowing people in the ACT and Northern Territory to count as part of the national vote in referenda. Do you think that them not being included as part of the state count should be changed, considering combined they have the population of Tasmania? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's not a perfectly good argument. Again, I don't know that. I'd be up for that. I mean, the ACT is very progressive. I'd certainly be up for the ACT having, I'd give it 2 votes. It voted yes in the Republic. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Are you suggesting that that the territories combine?
Potentially, considering they've got combined a population that's perhaps more representative.
It's good. No, it's good. I'm sure. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point the ACT has a bigger population than Tasmania. Full stop. But Tasmania is. There's hardly anyone in Tasmania that isn't a member of the federal parliament. So,
Okay. Next question. Okay. We'll take the question there, and then on this side of the room after that one.
Thank you, Malcolm, for your presentation or discussion. My name's Jim. You talked about some of the examples in the US and touched on effectively some Supreme Court appointments. We can see how that worked out.
Yeah.
One of the elements of the US selection process, of course, is they appear for congressional hearings.
The senator,
for High Court, for Supreme Court judges, and candidates, and therefore there is a degree of transparency. One of the criticisms in the Australian High Court process, and indeed the federal courts as well, is that there isn't that transparency, and some researchers have suggested there's a bit of a loyalty effect. Whichever government appointed you might lean a bit that way. I don't know what the stats stack up on that. But have you got any views about the appointment process to courts in the High Court and the federal courts in Australia, which after all are all at the discretion of whichever government's in power?
Government of the day, I don't think, it's not entirely satisfactory, I grant you, but I wouldn't want to politicise it any more than it is already politicised. And I mean, in terms of, I'm just picking up, Paul referred to Tony Mason, who died recently at a very great age. But Tony was a very progressive High Court judge and Chief Justice. He was appointed by a Liberal government. I'm pretty sure he was appointed by McMahon, but I might be wrong. But
Bill Dean was appointed by Fraser too.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think High Court judges have got a record in Australia of being, quote, loyal to the government that appointed them. And generally, particularly if they're appointed like James Edelman, who was appointed by my government, who they're relatively young, they're going to be on the bench in the course of many governments. So I wouldn't support changing our system, only because I'm not sure that how you'd improve it.
Of course, the authority is in the Constitution.
Pardon?
The authority is in the Constitution.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right, exactly right.
And now we do have a woman in the front here, but we'll get a question from over here and then we'll come back
to the gentleman here.
That's right.
Right.
Thank you. Malcolm, you've described how uninspiring the Big C Constitution is. And you've also, you have raised some of the issues that you have with the Constitution as well. But you've also mentioned how Australia is, the most successful multicultural democracy in the world. I guess my question is, despite all of its flaws, do you think that our constitutional system, big C and small c, has contributed to us having a relatively successful multicultural democracy?
Yes,
and if so, how can we be making the constitution, big C and small c, more inspiring to Australians, something that Australians can be more proud of?
Well, I think we could do with a lot more civics, and I don't mean that in a sort of dreary kind of, classroom type context, but I think we should be prepared to talk about it more often, and understanding how a system of government works. I think we've got a phenomenal opportunity at the moment, by the way, because, and I think a lot of Australians, by the way, are aware of this, because when you compare our electoral system to that, say, in the United States and the UK, in the UK, their political system is much closer to ours, of course, but they have voluntary voting and first past the post, and this is really blowing up on them.
Yeah.
And there, for some reason or other, there's a reluctance to change it. I'm told Andy Burnham is in favour of electoral reform there, but you see the problem they've got is that they now have, because in first past the post, the plurality wins. If there are 10 candidates, 8 of whom get 10%, 1 of whom gets 11%, and 1 of whom gets 9%, the one with 11% wins. Okay, but in Britain now, you've got 5 parties, at 5 big parties. So going from left to right: Greens, Labor, Lib Dem, Conservatives, Tories, and Reform, and then you've got a bunch of smaller parties, and of course you've always got independents. So you will have, in that fractured environment, you'll have people winning constituencies with, less than 40% primary vote. Maybe
much less.
High,
in some cases.
maybe even less than 30%. And that, I just don't think that has any legitimacy. And so, this is the problem. One of the problems Starmer had, apart from being, a poor communicator. But he, well, that was his problem, his biggest problem. I mean, I'm serious. I don't know whether people say he's a nice guy. I don't know whether he's a nice guy or not. But I'm happy to accept that he is. But he just was terrible communicator. But that, he had 2/3 of the House of Commons and had got 1/3 of the vote. Now Albo, the last election, got maybe a 33 or 4% primary vote, but because there were preferences, he can say, yes, my national vote was, whatever it was, 52%, 53%. And you could say, not every one of those votes, I wasn't everybody's first choice, but I was preferred, It's like it's that two-party preferred. So I think we should talk about that more often, because Australians like being telling ourselves that we're better than other people, and on this case we actually are, and it gives you an opportunity, one of those rare occasions where our boastfulness has some merit. So I think we should do more about it.
I mean, the story too of the Constitution and the Federation occurring. I mean, it is a story of people getting together, putting aside to some extent sectional interests of the colonies, foreseeing a nation, foreseeing a kind of a national interest, and it's a kind of a story of cooperation and coming together, which could inspire us in these more divided times.
Yes,
maybe?
well, I think that's right. Well, I mean, we've got so many people, and so much of the media, both curated and social, is trying to divide us. So we've got, I think we need to do more to work together, and this sort of, not this stuff about monoculturalism. I mean, what a piece of garbage that was. Pauline Hanson should give more speeches, I reckon. I reckon if she gave a press club speech every fortnight, she'd be back around 6% pretty quickly.
I am tempted to follow up with a question about how the leader of the party that you were once leader of handled that question.
Terribly.
When it was put to him.
Terribly. I mean, couldn't have been worse. I mean, if you'd sat down and said, now how can, this inevitable question is coming up, how can I absolutely make a hash of it? I couldn't. Yeah, it was incredible. No, it's obvious. I mean, every. I remember John Howard at one point tried to sort of inch away from the term multicultural at one point, but even he wasn't prepared to do that.
Malcolm, first, thank you for being a very interesting Prime Minister.
Oh, thank you.
I used to turn John Howard off.
Right. Okay.
Didn't turn you off.
Okay.
But my question is more to how Parliament currently runs.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in your view on the impact the running of Parliament is going to have with the increasing youth rejection of the two-party system and the rise of independents and small parties.
Well, I mean, look, I don't think having two big parties is part of the Constitution. Large or well, certainly not part of the large C. I don't think it's part of the small C. I don't have a problem with coalition governments, or I would like, as long as there's 150 members of the House of Representatives and they've been fairly elected. I don't care whether they're all independents or not. I mean, it'd make it a pretty interesting experience. But this whole can I just confess this? As the leader of a major party, I have always said, "Oh, minority government. You don't want to have minority governments. Vote for us." But the reality is, we've had so many minority governments in Australia. We've got a lot of parliaments in Australia. we've got 8, state and territory parliaments. We've got 9 parliaments in Australia, and there always have many. So I don't think minority governments are a problem at all. I mean, I think they can be, but you look at the Gillard era. The 43rd Parliament. I mean, the instability in that Parliament was not caused by the minority, the independence that Julia was relying on. It was caused by Kevin, trying to get his job back. That's what was the instability. And, there was Tony Abbott throwing bombs and so forth, but the opposition always does that. So, no, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried more about, what worries me more about is people being alienated from politics, and I'm worried about the politics of division. I'm worried about the sort of collapse on the centre-right. I mean, there is no, the only major party or party of any consequence that you could describe as a centre party today is the Labor Party. I mean, the Liberal Party you cannot honestly describe as a centre-right party anymore. And of course, One Nation, certainly wouldn't even pretend to be centre anything. So, so I think anyway, hopefully that ramble answers your question more or less.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to I think you have won the raffle.
By accident, I think. Thank you so much for a frank and fascinating conversation. It's been incredibly enjoyable. My name's Annalise. I guess I identify at the moment as a recovering public servant with a passion for good government and governance. I really appreciated the reflections you had on the secret ministries. I think we all watched a little bit aghast, particularly if you were in one of those or serving under a department that was impacted potentially by that. My question and my deep insecurity after the time I spent in the public service is what prevents the next one with the constitutional framework we have and the reliance on pushback. You referenced the role of the Governor-General, the position that you were expecting, the frank, fearless advice from the head of PM&C to, I think your words were, institutionalise you in some form or send you for some help.
Yeah, well, I just can't. I can't. Well, I mean, I've dealt with quite a few secretaries of PM&C over the years, but none of the ones I worked with, I think would have countenanced that. I think.
Where did it come from? Because I've watched a lot of people not want to push back.
It is, it's a real problem. Look, it is a real problem. And you see this in robo-debt, of course, I mean, let me say a little bit about robo-debt. So one of the things that mystifies me most about that episode is that legal advice that something was unlawful, even if it was in draft form or not yet finalised, was ignored. Now, my experience of the APS always has been, I'm not one of those politicians that criticise the public service, quite the contrary. But my experience is that they are generally more conservative, more cautious, and more risk averse, right? And so the whole thing I found unbelievable. And I know, there was the popular theory that, it was Scott Morrison, the bulldozer, that, got them to do it, but there's no evidence to that effect. I mean, nobody said that. Like that was... So, this, I find that, so there's no evidence that there was political pressure from some, unscrupulous politician for them to ignore that advice. So it worries me. I mean, there is a tendency for people, particularly when you get strong personalities, for people to tell them what they want to hear. And you see this, so one of the things I used to do, and obviously clearly I wouldn't have, you don't become Prime Minister if you're a shrinking violet, right? So, but one of the things I always used to do was make sure that I got different views. I didn't rush to, there are critics of mine say, oh, Malcolm took a long time to make decisions. The record, that is literally ahistorical to say that. But what I did do was make sure that I got all the best input I could, only in a practical way, because I'd like to, if there are 10 people who've got some knowledge on this, I'd like to pick their brains. So I might come up with a better decision. And the other thing I used to do is if I was getting, say, a briefing from, on health, you had the secretary and the minister would show up, I would find out, or get my office to find out, or PM&C to find out, who was the person in the department that actually knew what was going on, and get them in the room. And so that then you could actually talk to someone who really, the domain expert. But that's sort of that's a bit unusual. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it rocked everyone. And it's, look, I mean, this is, no, I'm not going to talk about it. I was going to say something that's a bit bleak, but I won't end it. But yeah, but it is, you've got to be, it is very troubling. And I think that, that's why, well, that won't happen again. There's legislation that covers it. Yeah. But I think that, look, if you as a leader in any line of work, if you basically create a culture where people only tell you what you want to hear, you're a really bad leader. I mean, I actually had, when I was a banker, I was giving advice to a big bank. And when I was an investment banker, I was never been a real banker, but I was a partner of Goldman Sachs, and I was giving advice to this bank. And the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, didn't like what I was telling him. And he said to me, I do not pay investment bankers to tell me what I don't want to hear. I said, fair enough. I said, can I tell you, an even worse investment is to pay them to tell you what you do want to hear. And anyway, the thing just to finish that, the thing I was giving advice he didn't want to hear, and when it got to the board, the director said, what does Malcolm think about this? And anyway, so they took my advice. But which was good advice. But yeah, no, it's a real test of a good leader gets other people's views.
Look, going to have to leave it there. Thanks for the questions, and thanks to especially our guest Malcolm Turnbull for his answers. I also want to thank the National Archives of Australia for their assistance in putting on this event. I've been doing this event for a very long time. It never ceases to be a pleasure. Thanks for all of your help. Thanks for coming along, and I'm going to hand over to Marissa, who's going to wind up the proceedings.
Thank you. So lastly, thank you so much, Mr. Turnbull, for coming tonight and for sharing all of your wisdom about the Constitution with us. The thing that I was particularly excited about, because We're the National Archives is the idea of civics education for all people. So we're very invested in that. I like it when people come here and talk about that. So thank you for coming here and being part of that tonight. So again, thank you so much, Mr. Turnbull. Thank you, Paul Barclay. And thank you all for coming and for answering, asking questions and for being part of this real thinking about the Constitution event that we've had tonight. So finally, let's just give Mr. Turnbull and Paul Barclay one last appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.